In this video, I'm going to go over how to name compounds. So we're going to start with an example like, I'm picking a pretty difficult one because I want to make this video worth your time here. So we're going to go through this flowchart on how to name this compound, and then we'll do one more after that. The first question you have to ask yourself when you're naming them is to determine if it's ionic or covalent. To do that, you ask, does it have a metal? In fact, Mn is right here, which means it's in the metal, so the answer is yes. So what you do when you have a metal is you name the metal. In this case, Mn is manganese. Be careful that you don't think it's magnesium. So I named the metal, it is magnesium. The next thing you have to ask yourself is it a transition metal? Because if it's a transition metal, it's going to have those Roman numerals in the name. If the answer is no, then you move on and you name the nonmetal, but you change the ending to "ide." If it's a transition metal, you have to work for it a little bit more. And that's why I picked a harder one, because Mn is in fact a transition metal. And just to review where your transition metals are at, it's this area right here. If there's anything in that area, then you need Roman numerals. Now there's a few over here as well that you have to be careful with, and they actually do get Roman numerals, but you're not tested on those right now. All right, so is it a transition metal? The answer is yes, it is. All right, so I'm going to have to use Roman numerals for the charge of the metal. And this becomes difficult. So you really have to kind of look at this. Well, PO4, there's 3 capital letters to start with, which means part of this is a polyatomic. So you would flip to the back of your periodic table list to find your polyatomic, and it is PO4 with a -3 charge. So I'm going to kind of separate these out. I have Mn. I only have one Mn because there's not a little subscript below to tell me I have more than one. And I have a PO4. Now that PO4 is my polyatomic. The entire thing, this entire team, has a -3 charge. The overall charge for an ionic compound must be 0. So if this is -3, this is going to have to be a +3 to cancel it out, because 3 minus 3 is 0. This right here is what I need to put in Roman numerals. So I'm going to add to it now. It's manganese, Roman numeral 3, and then I take a look at what I have over here. If it is a basic nonmetal off of the front of the periodic table, so if it was fluorine, I would change the ending to fluoride, and I'd write it down and move on. Sulfur would become sulfide, I'd write it down, move on. Because this is a polyatomic, you look on this side, you find it, and you write the name phosphate. You do not change the ending of anything that's on the back. And that's how you name it if it's an ionic compound. If it does not have a metal, such as, let's go with CO2, it's a fairly easy one. If there's no metal, then you're going to use prefixes. So the first nonmetal gets a prefix if it is anything other than mono. So because carbon only has one here, I do not use prefix mono on that first element. So I would just write carbon. I do not change the ending of carbon. I just leave it alone. Whatever the first one is, don't change the ending, you just write it down. You do add a prefix if it's anything other than mono. Now for oxygen, the prefix for 2 is di, so you'd put di, and then oxygen would become oxide. You definitely change the ending of that second one, just like you did over here. Always change the ending. That ending just signifies that it's bonded in a compound. Now, if you had something like this, you would do dicarbon, And 8 is octahydride. Hydrogen becomes hydride. Sometimes it's a little funny to figure out where that ending would work. But there's your review on naming compounds.